started. Welcome to today's Tech Tuesday, determining which technology and if technology is right for you. I'm Tom Levine. I'm the typical host here, but we actually have a very wonderful guest presenter today. We have Jeff Driever, the president of Connective Computing. He's been working in computers for over 30 years, and he's been the president of Connective for 25 years as well. So he's very well respected, and he knows his stuff. Just to get some bookkeeping out of the way, if you haven't been on yet, go ahead and check out Cornerstone's Resource Center. You can access all of our webinars, including all the Tech Tuesdays, and it doesn't require a password. If you're a broker joining us for the first time, you're able to get there through our website, through the resources drop down, and it also has access to all of our white pages as well, and you can access it 24/7. Also, we have Cruise in the Caribbean, which is our reward program for new sales. If you like to start tracking your progress for that, go to www.crnstone.com/cruise-2020. Any new sale between the qualifying dates of January 1st and December 31st are allowable for this contest. And if you're interested, additional qualification details are available on our website. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. It actually looks like we already have a question, and we will be getting to that shortly as well. Here he is.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everyone. Let's talk a little bit about technology. Sorry, I'm getting situated here. We're going to talk a little bit about the different categories of devices, operating systems, components, and what affects cost and performance. Handhelds, iPhones, iPads, these little tiny tablets, they all have their place, and they're computers, no doubt about it, but they're not really a good choice for business. Tiny screens and tiny keyboards, you can't. Again, they have their place, and in a pinch, you can bang out an email on a little tiny keyboard in your hand, but that's not what you want to use every day. Tablets also have their place. You probably don't want one to be your primary device, but maybe. We'll talk about that. And then laptops, and of course, desktop PCs. So a tablet, it's lightweight, it's portable. Ladies can slip them in their purse sometimes if they have a big one. Fits in your briefcase. They're not going to be as powerful as a laptop or a desktop, but a tablet typically has a different kind of CPU. Typically doesn't run Windows or Mac operating system. There are exceptions, but typically they're not going to be as fast and powerful, and you can't do as many things. You can't run as many programs on them. They can be great for a specialized application. I have a client who's a dermatologist, and their electronic medical records system has an application specifically for the iPad. So they take an iPad right in the patient room, and they can do all kinds of great stuff in terms of dermatology. So that works great for them. As a hobby, I actually run the soundboard for a local band, and I use an iPad to control the mix from anywhere in the room. It's awesome. I can walk all around with it. But when I bought the iPad, I thought, well, this will be a good tool for work too. I can take it to meetings and take notes on it, and I can do all kinds of things. And honestly, to me, it's a great toy. My son loves to play the race car driving game on the iPad, but I use it for that one specific application. It works really well for that. I don't find a use for it anywhere else in business. That's an iPad. That's the standard size. That's one tablet. The exception to that rule maybe is the Microsoft Surface. That's a product that has an actual Intel processor in it. It runs a full-blown copy of Windows, and you can run, I think, any application on it. So you could do all kinds of business stuff on there. But they're expensive. I think they'll cost you more than a good laptop. And a tablet is going to be more easily stolen or damaged or lost than even a laptop would be. So there's some trade-offs there, but that may be an option for you. A tablet's really great for presenting information. So you can preload text, graphics, all kinds of stuff. You can download PDFs about things, and you can load all that up on your iPad. And if you're going to go sit down one-on-one with a customer and explain something to them, you can stick that iPad in their face and show them all kinds of cool stuff on it. And it works really well for that, for just coughing up information and presenting it to someone. Um, Typically, any kind of tablet is not going to be good for entering information. Even a Surface with a attached keyboard or an iPad, they have some fairly nice keyboard. They're still not as good as a desktop keyboard or a laptop keyboard. You still normally don't have a mouse. I guess with a Surface you can add like a USB mouse, but um, it's a lot harder to control, to make edits, to enter data. The tablet is probably not a great everyday device. It's probably better for certain applications. A laptop, on the other hand, is still portable, but it's fully functional. You're going to run a full-blown copy of Windows or the Mac operating system, and you can run any program then. If you're running full Windows, you can run any Windows program. Same for the Mac. Laptops are not quite as powerful as a desktop. Every single piece of electronics inside that case has been miniaturized because everybody wants theirs to be smaller and thinner and lighter. It's also been optimized uh, to use less power when they design that electronic component, whether that's the central processing unit, the video controller, even the hard drives. They build those such that they don't use as much power, so you get more battery life in your laptop. And they're also all designed, sort of a corollary to that, to not give off much heat. Heat is a real problem inside of a tablet or laptop. It's a very confined space. You don't have a great big fan like you might on the back of your desktop PC. You have to keep things cool. They literally have problems with them melting down because they get so hot when you're doing intense processing on them. So because every single component has been optimized in those ways and miniaturized, the end result is it's not going to be as powerful. If you look at a desktop PC with an Intel Core i5 processor that's, let's say, 3 gigahertz, even if that doesn't mean anything to you, all those numbers, you could see a laptop with those same specs, but it's going to be not exactly the same processor. It's going to be the Intel mobile processor, and it's not going to be as fast, even though it's the same clock speed and same description. And a laptop is, of course, good for presenting to a client just like a tablet would be, and it's a lot better for entering information. You have maybe not a full-size keyboard, but a very usable keyboard on most laptops, and you can certainly attach a full-size keyboard. The desktop generally for business is the best choice still. Um, it can do everything, right? So uh, you can run any program. Because they're a larger cabinet, they don't have cooling issues. So you're going to get the most, they're able to put the fastest CPU chip in there, the fastest video board in there, and your whole system, every component is going to run a little faster, be a little more powerful. So, you know, apples to apples comparison, a desktop versus a laptop with the same specs, the desktop will be faster every time, but it'll be more powerful every time. Obviously, it's the best choice if you're going to be entering information, you're typing in names and addresses and whatever else. You can sit with a full-size monitor, you can have a full-size keyboard, you can adjust those, and you should, so that you have good posture and you don't end up with the kind of neck and wrist problems that you might have working on a laptop or tablet all day. So especially if you do a lot of data entry, you definitely want a desktop. And it's going to give you the best price for the performance. Again, everything in a laptop's been miniaturized and optimized. That costs money. So a laptop's generally going to be a little more expensive. Plus, you're buying the monitor every time. If you buy a desktop, you can buy a nice monitor. You can use that with the next desktop you buy. Or if you already have a monitor today, you can buy a new desktop connected to that monitor. So um, for the performance that you get, the desktop is going to be the best price. You should know that a lot of companies now are making what they call an all-in-one desktop PC. It's basically a monitor that sits on your desk. It's a little thick on the back side, and you plug a keyboard and mouse into it, and that's a computer. But if you take that cover off, there's actually a laptop motherboard fastened to the back side of the monitor. It's really a laptop. So again, everything's been miniaturized, optimized for cooling. It's and they're not, they don't have to worry about power because that's plugged in, but they're going to use those same components. They've already made them, right? They've already invented a smaller processor and a smaller video controller. So the all-in-one desktop, it has its place. I have customers who use them at like a point of sale place where they want something the space is very confined, so they want something very small. So the combination of the monitor and computer all in one component that sits on top of the desk is a good choice for them. But it's basically a laptop. It's just kind of funny looking for a laptop. Having technical difficulties. Okay, so we talked a little bit about hardware, and we'll actually come back to that. But let's talk about operating systems. Handhelds and most tablets run either iOS, which is sort of the Mac operating system, a light version of that, or Android, which is a light version of Linux. Um, Desktops and laptops can run either Windows, as you know, or the Mac operating system. You can run Unix or its little brother Linux on a desktop PC. And then there's Chrome OS. So I want to talk a little bit about that because I'm sure you've heard of Chromebooks, especially if you have school-age kids. So iOS or Android, they're very different, but they do the same thing. So functionally, they're almost equivalent, really. They're both closed operating systems. So you can only get applications from their app store. On an iPad or an iPhone, you can only get an application. You have to buy it, or if it's free, I guess, get it through Apple's store. There is actually an option on Android devices to download applications from other places. There's a security risk there. You can't be sure of what you're getting. But in general, you're going to get your stuff from Google Play if you have an Android device. The web browsers on those devices are limited in functionality too. So you may find some more complex websites don't work if you're using an iOS device or an Android device, where they will on Windows or Mac. Now, where these can shine is as a remote control device. So you can take an iOS device or an Android device and you can run the remote desktop program, and you can take control remotely of a full-blown PC. There's a very smart lady I know, and that's how she works remotely. She has a giant iPad with an attached keyboard, and she can connect on a VPN, a secure connection, back to this office and control the computer that sits on her desktop remotely. And it works really well for her. So they can be a great addition as far as technology. But those operating systems are going to be kind of limited as a everyday device for your technology needs. Although, again, they can be viable for a very specific application, like the dermatologist I mentioned earlier. They take them right in the patient room. It works great. I use them to run sound. And you may have an insurance carrier at some point that releases an app for the iPad specifically that would let you go and collect census information or something along those lines. So I'm not aware of anything like that right now, but I'm not an expert at all the carriers. So they can have a place, certainly. Windows, of course, is the king of the hill, by far the largest market share. I've seen estimates anywhere from as low as 77% up to like 92% of all desktop and laptop devices run Windows. There are significant security problems with Windows, and there always will be. The way it was designed, when you install a program, that installer can add and replace files in the Windows system folder, and they're actually altering the Windows operating system. So if you're installing a legitimate business program, they're probably not going to do anything untoward, although they can create stability problems down the road if they make changes to Windows operating system files, especially if another program comes along and makes a different change to a accompanying file or that file. You end up with crashes and things. The larger problem, of course, is malicious software can get in there and make those same changes. a system like the Mac operating system doesn't allow anyone to change things in the operating system itself. Here's the operating system. You write your program so it works with what we've already written. You don't get to change what we've written, is sort of the policy. So maybe someday down the road, there will be a version of Windows that comes out and Microsoft will say, you know, all those programs you've paid for, the Microsoft Office and everything else you've bought, you're going to have to buy new versions of that because it's not going to work on this new version of Windows. That's the only way they can make Windows truly secure, really improve the security of Windows. However, Microsoft years ago went out and really courted folks who write computer programs. They really tried to woo them over to Windows for their application development. They gave them or sold them very cheaply great tools that made it easy to write programs that run on Windows. And as a result, you have this huge base of software that's written for Windows. And that continues today. They're still out there trying to woo programmers, I think. So most applications, especially in business, that are going to be written for the Windows platform first. A lot of those get ported over to the Mac platform, or maybe even down to a handheld device like Android or iOS. But typically in business, they're going to start with Windows. And the fact that Windows has all this market share and everybody's running Windows is proof of a truth in this industry that software drives the platform. So when you want to solve a business problem and you want a piece of software to do that, whether it's keeping your accounting with QuickBooks or Peachtree or some very specific thing to your industry, you're going to look for software to do that. And when you find the software that's right for you, you're going to buy the platform. You're going to buy Windows or Mac or whatever it is to be able to use that software. I had a client years ago who had a very stable working system, worked really well. Came in, completely ripped out everything, server, desktops, about 20 employees, ripped it all out, basically threw it all out, and put in a very expensive mini computer system with dumb terminals. I'm showing my age here, but it's many years ago. This was certainly 50,000, maybe closer to $100,000 investment, but it was all because they had found this software that ran on the mini computer that did exactly what they needed to run their business. So they made that investment. They pulled out a perfectly working system. You'll find that too. So if there's something specific that you need and it runs on Windows, you're going to buy a Windows PC. If all you need is to browse the internet and run Microsoft Office, run things like Word and Excel, that's available on the Mac or Windows. So you have a choice there. But there may be other things that you need that only run on Windows. I don't know. There are home and professional versions of Windows. You want the professional version. When you're out looking at computers, get the professional, Windows 10 Professional if you can. I think it's $100 to upgrade from home. So that may be an option if you already have home, or if you find a really great deal on a computer that comes with Windows Home, you can invest the $100 and pay Microsoft, to upgrade it. But the professional version is going to add some things that you're going to want. BitLocker is one of them. That's hard drive encryption from Microsoft. It works reasonably well. And we had a carrier recently who was trying to force everyone who visited their website to use BitLocker. I hope that has died because BitLocker is not appropriate for everyone. But if you have a laptop, let's say, you want BitLocker, you need to have that encrypted so that if that laptop is lost or stolen, no one can access the confidential information on there. The professional version also gives you remote desktop capability. So if you buy a desktop PC, let's say, with Windows 10 Professional on it, you'll have a method to control that remotely from your home or on a business trip or wherever you are on the planet. The remote desktop is built into Windows 10 Professional. That's not available with Home. There are networking benefits. If you're going to have multiple computers, the Professional is better for that, for management and for joining them together. And this may be the best part. With the professional version, you can defer all these Windows updates that come out from Microsoft. You can tell Windows 10 Professional, I only want to do those in the middle of the night when I'm sleeping. And in fact, I want to wait. Anything that comes out, I want to wait a little bit of time and let the rest of the world test it out. With Windows 10 Home, Microsoft pushes those updates out. You get them immediately. Your computer starts prompting you to reboot. You could be in the middle of a huge proposal or something, and the stupid thing pops up and wants to restart your computer. So it may be worth the extra money to get professional just for that. I'm not sure. There are also a very few applications out in the big world that require the professional version. We don't see that very often, but there are certain programs you want to run on Windows that may say you have to have Windows Professional instead of Home. So for business, get the Professional. And of course, Windows runs on the hardware from any vendor. We like Hewlett Packard, but you can use Dell, Lenovo. There's many others. I would recommend you try to avoid something some guy built in his garage, some no-name system that maybe a name you don't recognize. I tell people HP is a $40 billion international company. They're not going anywhere. When they give you a warranty on that device, they're going to stand behind it. And even if you buy a HP computer from my company and I decide to close up shop and open a taco stand, which I've considered, you still have your warranty from HP. So spend a little extra, get a name brand computer is my advice. If we look at the Mac operating system, it is the second largest, but it's way behind. It's really very small market share. It is far more secure than Windows. It's by design. It's better built, a better constructed operating system, always has been. You will hear people say Macs don't get viruses. That's not true. The Mac is truly less likely to get a virus, and it does have better security inherently because it's better designed, and it's a smaller target. If I'm Mr. Criminal Virus Writer, do I want to write a virus that runs on 87% of the computers in the world or just 10%? So it's a smaller target, but it does happen. There are viruses on Macs, and you do need antivirus software. Probably the best part about the Mac OS is it gives you great connectivity to your other devices, your iPhone, your iPad, your iPod, your earbuds, whatever this week's product is. It just works. They just connect to each other, and it's seamless, and it's great. So if you have an iPhone and an iPad and maybe an iPod too, and you love them, and you want a device that's really going to connect easily with those, you might consider a Mac. If you had never touched a computer before, the Mac would actually be easier to learn. It's a little bit more intuitive. It's a little bit more consistent. It's really a very good graphical user interface. It's the original, right? Windows basically was stolen from the Mac interface, which is why Office is available on the Mac, but that's a whole other story. However, it's a little frustrating if you've grown up with Windows like I have and you've been using it for years, and when you switch to a Mac, a lot of the things work just the same. You do 9 functions on your new Mac, and it just works, and it's just the way you expect it. And you go to do that 10th thing, and it's completely different. And you're scratching your head going, how in the world do I do this? So I will tell you from experience and from observation of many folks, it can be a little frustrating if you're used to Windows. Again, it may be worth it though. You may be worth that little learning curve to make the switch over if that's the direction you want to go. You don't get as many choices on your Mac. You can't change as many things. A lot of that is controlled by Apple. You do it the Apple way. And you do have to buy the hardware, the desktop or the laptop from Apple. You can't just go pick out any piece of hardware and put the Mac operating system on it. I want to talk for a minute about Linux because you're probably going to hear about that. It's really mostly for servers. Very few desktop PCs run Linux, almost none. The statistics I saw said it was about 2%. I saw another one that said it was less, like a 0.5%. So it's not really many out there. It is more stable and more secure than Windows, but it does have a graphical interface, but it's all in all, as an operating system, it is not as user friendly as Windows or a Mac would be. It's almost exclusively used by nerds. There's an old joke: if operating systems were airlines, they said, if Windows Airlines, it would be neat and all the staff would be very capable, and they have an immense fleet of jets. And when you take off, the takeoff would be flawless, and you rise up above the clouds, and then the plane explodes. And if Apple ran an airline, the employees would all look and talk and act exactly the same. And if you ask them anything about the flight, they would just tell you that you don't want to know, you don't need to know, and please just return to your seat and watch the movie. But if there were a Linux airline, everybody would bring a piece of the plane to the tarmac and a toolbox, and then they would argue about what kind of plane they want to build. That's kind of how it is with Linux. You have to you almost have to be able to adjust a lot of these things yourself. And then Chrome, if you have a school-age kid, you've heard about Chromebooks. The Chrome OS on the Chromebooks is a variant of they have an open source operating system and that Google has put out there. So it's free and you can see all the source code and you could download a copy and you could make changes if you were a programmer and all that. That keeps the cost down, right? If you buy a laptop with Windows on it, the manufacturer is probably paying Microsoft somewhere between $100 and $200, depending on exactly which version of Windows. So that gets added right onto the top of the cost of the laptop, which is why you're seeing these laptops. They're taking low-end laptops and they're putting this free operating system, this Chrome OS on them, and calling them Chromebooks and selling them cheap. And that's why it's appealing, I think, to schools for school kids. It's very small market share, even with all the school kids using them. Tiny amount of them out there in the world, and it's a closed operating system. It's very limited. You can't run your Windows or Mac programs. There's almost no applications that actually run on the Chromebook. It's really designed to be a window into Google's online world, Google Docs and Google Sheets and all the other 1,000 Google things that there are. So all of your data gets stored in Google's cloud, and no doubt they mine that data then looking for your personal information so they can market to you and sell your information to other people. The very newest Chromebooks can run Android apps, but it's only the very newest ones, and not all of the Android apps work on those. That's something that they're developing right now. But I just, looking at all this, I just don't see where a Chrome is a good choice for business, Chromebook. So let's talk about the actual hardware in a little more detail. There's 4 things I want to touch on. The CPU is the brain of the computer system, right? That's where all the processing happens, where it does its thinking, so to speak. And there are 3 big types. The ones that Intel makes, there's a company called Advanced Micro Devices. It's almost always abbreviated AMD. And then there are ARM CPUs, and we'll talk about those too. Any of these can have varying numbers of cores. So a CPU core is like a brain of its own. So if you get a 4-core CPU, which is probably a good choice, it would have 4 processors inside it, and it can work on 4 tasks at the same time. So one core can be working on one thing while another core is working on something completely different. Now, different applications, different programs will take better advantage of having multiple cores than others do. A lot of your most basic programs will not run 1 bit faster on a 16-core processor than they do on a 2-core processor, because they're only ever going to use 1 core. It just doesn't matter. If you're multitasking, the operating system can sometimes steer this application to this core and this other application to this other core, but I don't know for sure how well Windows 10 does that. Windows 10 itself will make use of some of those additional cores. So there's a benefit, but a 4-core processor is not going to be twice as fast as a 2-core processor, because you can't utilize all those at the same time. But more is better. And then a CPU will have a clock speed associated with it. That's how many cycles per second. In other words, how many instructions per second each core can process. An instruction might be as simple as storing this number in this location in memory. So we got to do lots and lots of instructions to get any kind of meaningful result. The good news is they're measured in, gigahertz. So it's thousands of cycles per second. So it's doing thousands of these little iterations per second. Intel's obviously the market leader, by far the most popular. There are 4 different classes or models of CPUs that they're selling today. The Intel, what they call just the Intel Pentium, is their low end. I think that's available in a dual core, so it has 2 cores. The Core i3, i5, and i7, those are, as you would expect, more powerful as the numbers get larger. The i3 or the i5 is probably going to be the best choice for you. If you can find a deal on an i5 where it's just maybe the same price or a little more than an i3, get it. It's a little more powerful processor. The i7 is a very high-end processor that's great for full motion video editing, computer-aided design, some of these really, especially graphics intensive, but really high-level computing, powerful computing tasks. For everyday business use, it's not necessary. It won't hurt anything, but you're not going to get a lot of benefit for that. And it's probably going to be a significant additional cost, and you're not going to get a lot of benefit. And each one of those can have varying numbers of cores and clock speeds. So more cores is better, higher clock speed is better. AMD Advanced Micro Devices makes a CPU that's functionally equivalent to the Intel, and they're generally less expensive. I found a list of a bunch of different processors, and on that list they were showing these were both from Walmart.com. So if you're going to build your own PC in the basement, apparently you can get this very nice Intel processor for $273. That's actually a very fast processor, or an AMD, which is very, very close, for quite a bit less. This site had a third-party test results, and the Intel was slightly faster, I think about 2% higher score in this particular example. So they're very, very similar. The AMD is less. The AMD does require different drivers, so the different software for the hardware components, the underlying hardware components, and they can require different software, not usually, but that can happen. When you install Windows on a computer, it will figure out, the installer figures out whether you have an Intel or an AMD, and it'll install the proper drivers for the platform that you're installing on. I don't think Mac uses AMDs at all. I think all of their machines are Intel processors, but Windows can differentiate and use both. Recently, I was running a pretty highly technical utility program, and it kept crashing on me. I didn't know why, and I found out there was a different version for an AMD processor. And when I downloaded and ran that one, it worked a whole lot better. So you can encounter differences like that. When I was in college, and this might be going back a few years, my best friend and I were taking a programming class together, and we were working on a group project, and we'd written this program, and it ran fine on my IBM with the Intel processor, and it kept crashing on his, and we couldn't figure out why. It turned out because he had an AMD processor in his desktop PC. So going back again several years, I had a client who had an Excel. There was a certain function in Excel. Excel worked fine except for this one function, and we couldn't figure out why, and we researched it, and it turned out it was a bug in the AMD processor that was blown up. There's this one function in this one spreadsheet. Everything else worked fine on the computer. So this is very rare, but they can have compatibility issues with the AMD processor. If you're just doing general business stuff, it might be a good choice for you. Personally, I've always recommended Intel CPUs to my clients. I want to avoid those kinds of things. To me, it's worth the additional investment. And then I want to mention the ARM CPUs because a lot of tablets, well, probably nearly all tablets will use them. And in these days, you may see something that really looks like a laptop, but it has an ARM CPU in it. Advanced Risk Machine, I think, is what that stands for, and it's an industry standard. There's a group that has put together these standards for designing these chips based on this standard. That's what all the smartphones use and most of the tablets. The Microsoft Surface is an exception. It has an Intel processor in it, I believe, and runs full Windows. But otherwise, these tablets require a specific operating system. They're not going to run the same Windows that you would run on your desktop or your laptop. It's usually some variant of Linux. And there is a Windows 10 embedded product that's out there that you can run on an ARM processor. So it looks and behaves a lot like Windows 10. You cannot run all the Windows apps on it though, even though it looks like Windows 10. It's not the full Windows 10. And I guess there are some apps that work, and maybe there's a special version of Office to run in Windows 10 embedded. I'm not sure. And they can be manufactured by anybody. They just have to meet these standards. So if you're seeing something that says an ARM, an ARM processor, that's probably not what you want. Every computer has RAM, random access memory. It's where the computer does its work. It's like a chalkboard. You have to have power to it, otherwise it gets erased. So you can't store anything permanently in RAM. So when you look at tablets, phones, those kinds of things, they will have RAM, and they will also have something they probably describe as flash, which is your more permanent storage where your files and pictures and that sort of thing are stored. More is always better, although there's a point of diminishing return, right? If you have a desktop PC with 16 gigabytes of RAM, you're probably all set. If you could add 16 more or 100 more, it would help a little maybe, but it wouldn't be worth the money you'd spend. We recommend 16 gig if you're going to run Windows 10 on your laptop or desktop. That's plenty. You can probably get by with 8. But if you have more RAM, you get better performance. It actually improves the life of your hard drive, because when Windows runs out of RAM, it takes a whole bunch of stuff and saves it onto the hard drive and deletes it out of RAM, and it makes that available for another program to use. And then when you want to switch back to that stuff you were just working on, it has to read it back off the hard drive. Well, first it has to take something else out of RAM, store it on the hard drive, delete it to make room, and then it reads it back off. So you have this constant reading and writing of the hard drive if you don't have enough RAM. And you may see some advertised as being this really fast RAM, or they'll give you the speeds sometimes. Oh, it has this RAM or that RAM. Listen, the slowest RAM you can buy today is super fast. Don't worry about the speed. Now, see, the marketing girl has changed my slides and made them dance. Then there's data storage. That's where your stuff is saved. Like I was just mentioning, it's usually referred to as flash in a handheld device, or you might see it listed as an SSD drive. This is storage that doesn't require power. So you can write something there and it'll be stored there even if you lose power or you turn the thing off. On a desktop or a laptop, you can have either a solid state drive or a traditional hard drive. The flash drive, the solid state drive, is very fast, way faster than a traditional hard drive, but they're definitely more expensive. So that's one way you can give a nice performance boost to an older system. We actually had an older laptop here at Cornerstone that we let people just check it out when they were traveling and they could use it, and people would say, oh, this thing is so slow, it's terrible. And I put an SSD drive in it, and it's very usable now. It's not blazing fast, but it's so much better. So in that one particular instance, was a good example of how much difference it can make. That technology is less likely to fail completely, but they are prone to individual failures. So every time you save something on an SSD drive, what it actually does is it erases that spot and then it writes the new information there. And each individual little storage space on a flash device can only be erased so many times, and it will actually wear it out. So just to tell you, from my personal laptop, I have an SSD drive and a traditional hard drive, and I put my operating system and my programs on the flash drive, the SSD drive, and I store my data, my pictures, my spreadsheets, and all that stuff on the traditional drive, so that I'm not constantly writing and rewriting to the SSD drive. And I fire that thing on, man, it boots right up. Boom, it's up and running and ready to go. And if I have a very large document that I'm opening, it takes a little longer to open from that traditional drive, but it's not bad. The traditional drive is going to give you a much lower cost. So if you only need a small hard drive in your laptop, you can go with the flash drive. It won't cost you much more, and you'll get a nice performance boost. If you're going to store a lot of movies, or you're hoarding your email, and whatever it is, you have to have a large hard drive. The SSD drive, the flash drive, is going to be very costly. You'll want to use you want to buy a system with a traditional hard drive. We see the SSD drives at 256 gigabytes. That's kind of standard, where the traditional hard drives are typically 1,000 gigabytes of 1 terabyte. So 4 times the size, and they're usually a little less money with the large capacity drive in there. Your individual files are less likely to be lost. It doesn't have the same write and rewrite limitations as Flash does, but it is spinning usually at 5,400 revolutions per minute. And anything with moving parts will eventually wear out and fail. So we know the hard drive will fail. Those usually, if you went out and bought a hard drive off the shelf, they usually come with a 5-year warranty. So that the manufacturer believes that thing's going to last at least 6 years, or they wouldn't give you a 5-year warranty on it. So I don't worry so much about them failing, but I do know that it will eventually. And in either case, you want to make sure you have good backups. Now, if you buy a laptop or a desktop, you got to figure out how you're going to connect it to the network at your home or office. How you're going to get on the internet or connect to the other devices there. Back in the day, everything had a cord and you plugged it in, right? So that jack is integrated into most desktop PCs, and I think still in most laptops. A laptop or definitely a tablet might require an adapter cable. If you're going to use that, you have to be close to the jack where you plug it in. That could be on your cable modem, or it could be a jack on the wall in your office. The thing's going to have to be physically relatively near there. You can buy a 30-foot cord to plug it in, but you can't go across the doorway. The fire marshal will be mad. So you have to take that into consideration. The corded connection is usually the fastest, and it's almost always the most reliable. So all things being equal, I would recommend plug it in with a cord, especially for a desktop PC. Wi-Fi, any tablet or laptop that you buy is going to have Wi-Fi. There's very few desktops that have Wi-Fi built into them. But that's going to let you connect to your wireless device in the back room as long as you're within range. You can get interference. The neighbor or the office next to yours might bring in a new Wi-Fi device tomorrow and turn it on, and might start interfering with yours without any warning. Just out of the blue, you're losing your connection to the network all of a sudden, your connection to the internet. So you got to be within range. You need a good strong signal. And if you're using a desktop, you're probably going to have to buy a little adapter. They make a USB adapter that lets you connect it to the Wi-Fi. If you can run a cord and plug it in that way, you'd be better off. Some of the tablets and laptops have what they labeled WWAN, which stands for Wireless Wide Area Network. And what they're talking about there is a cellular data connection. So if you buy a device that has this built in, you have to get a SIM card from Verizon or Sprint or T-Mobile, and you're going to have to pay them every month to use it. But you can stand pretty much anywhere in the US and use your tablet or laptop and have internet access. So if you're on the move a lot, you may find that's worth it. It's worth the little additional expense to buy a device with that built in, and then the monthly cost that goes with it. As an alternative, most cell phones, most smartphones can create a Wi-Fi hotspot. I think all the iPhones have that, as long as your carrier, Sprint or T-Mobile, whoever allows it, and most of the Androids do as well. So if you have a smartphone, you can create a little Wi-Fi hotspot and you connect your laptop or tablet to that. That's actually what I do, because I don't have that. It's not that often that I'm somewhere that there's no Wi-Fi that I need to get online. So cost. If you're buying a desktop PC, probably the primary thing that's going to affect cost is the CPU chip. The high end, like the i7, the Intel Core i7 chips, and even the high end AMD chips as well, that are comparable, can cost over $500 just for that one component. So you look at the whole desktop, that's going to be a $1,500 desktop PC probably. with one of those really high-end CPU chips, where you can buy a comparable piece of equipment that maybe has a $150 CPU in it, and it's going to be that much less. So RAM, you want to make sure you get enough RAM, but that is going to affect the cost, how much storage you have to store your files, and then the warranty. A lot of systems come with a 1-year warranty, some others come with a 3-year warranty. We generally notice about $100 difference in price, but 3-year warranty is pretty nice. So for a laptop, there's lots of other factors. The screen size, the bigger screen is going to cost more. CPU, of course, same as a desktop, faster CPU costs more. How it's constructed, how durable it is. The low-end, inexpensive laptops, just as one example, typically the hinge that connects the screen to the laptop is made of plastic. The business laptops that we sell from Hewlett-Packard, they use magnesium for those because it's lighter weight than steel. They don't break. And I've seen many laptops where the screen's broken off the hinges because they're made out of cheap plastic. The weight of a laptop, everybody wants a lighter laptop, so they're going to charge a little more for that. Battery life, if you're going to go sit in the park, work on a park bench all day, you're going to need a longer battery life. If you're going to buy a laptop and it's going to spend a whole lot of its days sitting on your desk plugged into the wall, then you don't have to be concerned with battery life. How much storage in the warranty, same as a desktop PC. So when you're buying a laptop, you can have a big screen that's really fast processor and it can be really durable and hardly weigh anything and have great battery life, but that laptop costs a fortune. They make them, but they're thousands of dollars. What you need to do if you're looking at laptops is pick the 2 or 3 things that are important to you. Do you want a big screen? Do you want it to be really fast? Do you need really long battery life because you love the outdoors? And then go and find a laptop that meets those particular requirements, and don't worry so much about the other things. And then you can get a laptop at a reasonable price that's good for your needs. As far as performance, everything's important. You have to have balance. You can go buy a laptop or a desktop with a super fast CPU, but if you don't put enough memory in it, it's going to be slow. When you have 5 programs open, every time you click on something else, you're going to wait while it switches from one to the other. You could buy sort of a middle-of-the-road processor, put plenty of RAM in it and a fast SSD drive, you'll have a pretty quick device. So that's actually what I did. I have an older laptop and I put that SSD drive in and loaded it up with RAM, and it's great. I'm very happy with it. So balance all of those things. Make sure you get enough RAM. You don't have to buy a super fast processor, but don't go cheap on it either. And if the SSD drive makes sense for you, do that, because that will improve the performance. Shoo, I talked a lot. I think that's it. Someone had asked before we started, should they look at a tablet instead of a computer? I hope I've answered that question. If there's any other questions, you're welcome to type them in the chat window or the question window on there and go to meeting. Otherwise, I think we're about done. I'm going to let Tom say a few words here. Thank you.
Hello again. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Special thanks to Jeff for helping us out. I know that I'm not exactly the most technical expert with hardware or with building my own computer. So Jeff is definitely the expert and I defer to his judgment. If you had a question about some of the connectivity issues or with specifics on storage or RAM, we do have other presentations available through that resource page I mentioned earlier. You can go back and we've done breakout topics on the hardware of what exactly goes into what, if you are having some confusion on what like the CPU versus the storage area was. Other than that, if you have any other specific questions, please feel free to type them in the chat window. We've still got Jeff here for a few minutes, so any questions he'd be happy to answer. And if you have any other specific questions, please feel free to get me an email. It's TLEV LEVINE@crnstone.com. I'd be happy to answer them if I can, and if Jeff feels up to it, I'm certain he'd be happy to answer as well. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Once again, thank you for joining us for Tech Tuesday. Next week, or 2 weeks, we will be covering more of how to use GoToMeeting as a platform. And I'll be collaborating with Jess from our marketing department on that as well. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to email me, and thank you for attending.